Howdy guys, I know recently there's been a mass exodus in the community from D&D to other game systems as a show of support for third-party creators during this whole OGL nonsense. And as someone who's trying to break into the creator space, I thank you for that. I understand that a lot of people share my opinion in the sense that 5th edition fits a lot of people's needs and they've invested a lot into it already. So instead, what they're choosing to do is no longer support official content released by Wizards of the Coast and are instead going with homebrew products. So that leaves us with one choice. If you're canceling your DnDBeyond subscription, you're left with paper and pen. A lot of us don't really know how to do it the old-fashioned way, and that's where this video comes in. I'm going to show you guys the entire process of going through a character sheet manually. Now, before we get started breaking down how to go through and filling out your character sheet with paper and pen, I'm going to give you one quick life hack. I highly recommend after you're done putting down the majority of your character information, you put your character sheet either in a sheet protector or using bits of tape to overlay over certain sections, as these sections are going to be changing very frequently throughout your campaign and each session, and the last thing you want to do is as you're erasing the information, you rip your character sheet and have to fill it out all over again. So without further ado, let's start at the top. This part is fairly self-explanatory. We have our character's name, their class, their level, background, our name, their race, their alignment, and their experience points. Moving over to the left, we'll start with our first column. This is where we have all of our ability scores. I would recommend putting your bonus in the bigger section while your total score in the smaller portion, just because at a glance, you want to know what your bonus is a lot more than you want to know what the total ability score is. Next to that, we have one of our first sections that I would recommend putting tape over. Inspiration. Inspiration is a very binary thing. We have it and then we don't. I would recommend putting the tape just because you can burn through these really quickly depending on your GM. Below that, we have our proficiency bonus. You don't need to put tape over this section just because the proficiency bonus doesn't change too often. Below that, we have our saving throws. Your saving throws are calculated using your ability score modifiers, plus your proficiency bonus if your class is proficient in that skill. So for a rogue, you would have proficiency in dexterity and intelligence, so you'd fill in that little circle. Beneath that, we have our skills. This is calculated very similarly to saving throws. You add your ability modifier plus your proficiency bonus if you're proficient in that skill. However, if you have expertise in that skill, I would recommend notating this somehow, either with a star or a squiggly line or some other symbol. That way you can remember that you're supposed to double your proficiency bonus for this skill. For both saving throws and skills, I don't think you need to add tape just because these are fairly static. However, you might change things later on down the line, like if you get advantage on a skill or a saving throw from some other effect or trait. Moving over to the middle column, we have our armor class, initiative, and speed. Your armor class is determined based on your equipment and your dexterity bonus. However, certain classes or subclasses have other features that impact your armor class and let you calculate it a different way instead. Next to that, we have initiative, which is calculated by your dexterity bonus and any other feats or abilities that we have that might increase this. I know there are certain subclasses that let you use a different ability score instead of dexterity to calculate this, so make sure you pay attention to that when you're calculating and use the higher number. And just to the right of that, we have our character's speed. This should be fairly static for most characters. However, this is determined mostly by your race. Most races have a baseline 30 speed, but smaller races like gnomes have a baseline 25 speed. There are classes like barbarians and monks that will increase your speed later on, but there's also feats like the mobile feat that will do this too. For all three of these boxes, I don't think you need to put tape over them just because these don't change that often. Beneath that, we have our current hit points and temporary hit points, along with a small section to write our maximum. These two sections I would highly recommend if you're not using a sheet protector to put tape over, because these will change very often, especially if your campaign has a lot of combat involved in it. The last thing you want to do is as you're erasing your hit points for the 15th time, you tear your character sheet and you have to write it all over again. Beneath that, we have our total hit die and our hit die type. This isn't too relevant for a lot of classes unless you take a lot of short rest. However, some classes like fighters do use this information often, so do keep an eye on it. And next to that, this is where we find all of our death saves. Ideally, you shouldn't be looking for this section too often, but if you are caught in that situation, here's where you mark off whether you succeeded or you died. I would recommend putting tape over this just in case. Next, we have our attacks and spellcasting box. I would highly recommend putting your main weapons or your favorite spells here. That way, you're not stuck going through your entire equipment and your spell list to try to figure out what the bonuses and effects are. When it comes to weapons, your attack bonus is normally calculated using your proficiency bonus and your strength modifier. However, certain weapons that have the finesse modifier to it will use your dexterity instead. There are some exceptions to this, like certain spells, feats, or subclasses that allow you to use a different ability score plus your proficiency bonus to calculate your attack bonus. In the section below, I would write bullet points for any additional effects your weapons or your spells might have, that way you don't forget about them too. Now this brings us to the top right section of our character sheet, our personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. This is more important for roleplay and getting immersed into your character, so just quick bullet points about your character's ideology is helpful for this part. Moving down to the bottom left hand corner of our character sheet, we have our passive perception and our other proficiencies and languages. I know I didn't go over passive perception earlier, but that's because a lot of GMs don't use this. However, it's still good information to have on your character sheet. This is calculated using 10 plus any other additional bonuses to perception your character might have. At the very bare minimum, your wisdom modifier. Below that, we have our proficiencies and languages. I would recommend writing your armor proficiencies, weapon proficiencies, and other tools and languages your character might know, because you never know when those things might be relevant for your campaign. Next to that, we have our equipment. Just write your main equipment that your character is using and what effects they might have. Everything else can go on the next page. Along with that, we have our money situation. Quickly just jot down these numbers, and if you can, add a little bit of tape over this, as your money situation might change often. And now we have the last box on this page, our features and traits. I cannot stress enough that in the features and traits, you need to write down every feature, every trait that your character has that has a limited use or impacts their attacks. Because the last thing you want is to forget that you have something like sneak attack or action surge, second wind, or some other feat that could help you out in a situation, and then you end up dying because of it. Moving on to page 2 of our character sheet, this page is a lot more optional, but is still fairly important. At the top, we have our character description, their name, age, height, weight, eye color, skin color, and hair color, or style. Moving down to the next row, we have our character appearance. If you're an artist, draw a quick sketch of your character, that way you can really get into their mindset and kind of get more immersed. However, if you're like me and you don't have any art skills, print out a picture of what you think your character does look like and paste that down in here. While next to that, we have our allies and our organizations. This is important to know who your character has interacted with and has had positive relations with. That way, in a sticky situation, they know who they can call upon or go to for help. Within this section, we have a little box dedicated to any deity our character might be followers of, along with their symbol. Moving over to the bottom left, we have our character backstory. In my opinion, just write quick bullet points of important things in your backstory here, because everything else is kind of on a Word document or printed elsewhere. Just to the right of this, we have our last 2 boxes. Now, I know I stressed how important it is to write all your features and traits on the first page, but not all the effects of those traits and not every feature and trait is actually necessary. The importance of writing the main features and traits on the first page, because you just want to know, hey, I do have something called second wind and I can use this twice, but you don't have to write down the whole description of what that is there. It's just to remind yourself that you do have that option available. Here is where you can write out a much broader description of what each feature does or the entirety of the feat. And below that is our treasure. This is where I would say you write all the other miscellaneous items your character has collected, all the teeth, dragon bones, fancy cups that they stole, and rugs that they managed to sneak off with. Now, if you're a martial character and never plan to multi-class into a spellcaster, this page is completely useless for you. However, if you are a spellcaster, this page is super important for you. Arguably, one of the most important pages for you. This is where all your spells are. Starting at the top, we have our spellcasting class. Fairly self-explanatory. If you're a wizard, you write wizard. If you're a warlock, you write warlock. Next to that, we have our spell casting ability. This is important to know because if you multi-class, you might have a different spell casting ability for those spells. So a wizard would write intelligence in this area. Next to that, we have our spell save DC. This is calculated using 8 plus your proficiency bonus and your spell casting ability modifier. So intelligence for a wizard. Next to that, we have spell attack bonus. This is calculated very similarly to weapons. So it's your proficiency bonus plus your spell ability modifier. And below that, we have all of our spells, from cantrips all the way to level 9 spells. Here's where you write down every single spell your character knows and its effects, or at least the main parts of their effects. I would highly recommend putting tape or a sheet protector on this page over the total spell slots and the spells expended, because you're going to be going through this part a lot and changing these numbers very often. Another thing that I would recommend is making some type of key or notation to let you know whether a spell uses your spell save DC or your spell attack bonus. That way you can quickly glance at the information and know what bonus you're adding to that spell, or if you're asking for a saving throw instead. And with that, that concludes going through a character sheet manually. Now, there are many options when it comes to character sheet layouts. The one I went through is the official one provided by Wizards of the Coast for free. However, there are other ones that you can buy off Etsy or other creators that group it up slightly differently and add extra art around the edges. I personally prefer the ones that group up all your skills and your saving throws with the ability score themselves. That way, it's a little bit easier to know which skills are actually associated with what ability score. If you found this video helpful and enjoyable, go ahead and leave a like on this video. And if you'd like to see more like this for other game systems like Call of Cthulhu, Pathfinder, or even Starfinder or other systems like that, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss those videos when those come out. But yeah, see you guys next time.